Welcome to the New Features Training for Payables Management in Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013. My name is Cheryl Waswick and I will be your presenter today. I am a Senior Technical Support Engineer on the Microsoft Dynamics GP Applications Support Team. There are many new features for Payables. The new features include several enhancements to the void process, the ability to reprint the check remittance information, additional fields that you can edit on the Payables transaction, including 1099 information, and other 1099 form enhancements, and the creation of a 1096 summary form. Lesson 1 for Payables Management. In this lesson, we will review the void enhancements. First, when a payment is voided, not only will the invoice return to open status, but also the credit documents will be unapplied as well. Secondly, when you void a credit card payment, the open invoice under the credit card vendor is also voided if it has not been paid out. Third, you will receive a warning message if you try to void a payment that has already been reconciled in bank reconciliation. Additional reconcile indicators will be visible next to the check in the navigation list. Let's review these new features for the void enhancements in Microsoft Dynamics GP. In the Payables Transaction Inquiry window for ACE Travel, notice that check number 20068 is for a net of $400. This is from a $500 invoice that has a $100 credit memo fully applied to it. In the Void Historical Payables Transaction window, I'll go ahead and void check 20068. If I redisplay the vendor, the Payables Transaction Inquiry window now shows the payment as voided, but the full amount of the invoice for $500 is now back open, and the credit memo for $100 is completely unapplied from the invoice. The second enhancement is voiding with a credit card payment applied. In the Payable Transaction Entry window for ACE Travel, I will key invoice number 2 for $800. On this invoice, I'm going to add an $800 credit card payment on the fly. I'll choose the Americharge vendor, and the receipt number is credit card. So I'll go ahead and post that. In the Payables Transaction Inquiry window for ACE Travel, notice that there are two credit card payments, a previous one for $1,000 for invoice number 1, and the credit card payment I just keyed for $800 against invoice number 2. All these invoices and payments are fully applied to each other, so they are in history status. When I look at the credit card vendor in the Payables Transaction Inquiry window, you'll see that an invoice was created for the $800 credit card payment that I just keyed and posted. However, they also have a previous $1,000 credit card payment that has already been paid out. In the Void Historical Payables Transaction window, you can see that both payments for ACE Travel are listed. These reflect the $1,000 invoice and the $800 invoice that are on the credit card vendor. Remember that the $1,000 invoice was already paid out, so if I go ahead and try to void this payment on ACE Travel, the system will immediately alert me that this credit card payment created a vendor invoice that cannot be voided at this time. Choose Continue to void the payment without voiding the invoice. So if I click Continue, it'll void the payment only on ACE Travel and it won't touch the invoice on the credit card vendor, or I can cancel out of it. This functionality is the same as before. However, if I choose to void the $800 payment that is not paid out on the Americharge vendor, I'll go ahead and void that. In the Payables Transaction Inquiry window for ACE Travel, notice that both credit card payments are voided under ACE Travel. In the Payables Transaction Inquiry window for the credit card vendor AmeriCharge, notice that only the credit card payment for $800 that was not paid out has been voided. This is the new functionality. The credit card payment for $1,000 that was already paid out has remained untouched. The third enhancement is a visual indicator or message indicating that a check you're trying to void has already been reconciled in the bank reconciliation module. In either the Void Open Payables Transactions window or the Void Historical Transactions window, a new field has been added to the right side called Reconciled. This field will be populated with a No if the check has not been reconciled in BankRec, or a Yes if the check has been reconciled in BankRec. If you click on one that says No, you do not receive any messages and can go ahead and void the check. If you click on one that says Yes, you will also be prompted that this payment has been reconciled. Do you wish to continue? So you have a second chance to know that this check has been reconciled. You are able to go ahead and void a check that has been reconciled in BankRec. A visual indicator has also been added to the transaction list. If I navigate to the transaction list for Payables transactions for ACE Travel, I can see a new visual indicator in the second space. For this payment, if I hover over the icon, it tells me this record has been reconciled. The icon above it has red dots on it that shows this payment has been voided, which also causes it to be reconciled. So I hope the new visual indicators will be helpful to you so that you know if you're trying to void a check that has already been reconciled. Lesson 2 for Payables Management. In this lesson, we will look at how to reprint check remittance information. This will not reprint the actual check, it'll just reprint the remittance information that was on the original check. Let's take a look at this new functionality in Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013. In the Payables Transaction Inquiry window, I have two payments shown in the window. The first is a check that has not been voided, and the second is a check that has been voided. I'll select the first check and drill back on the document number. Notice a new button called Recreate Check Stub has been added to the Payables Payment Zoom window. If you click it, you can print to screen printer or file. Note that there is no email functionality. This will reprint the information that was on the original check remittance in a report form. I can also reprint the check information for the voided check. I'll drill back on the document number, click on Recreate Check Stub, print the check stub to screen, and notice the apply information printed for the voided check and the word void is under the title at the top. This functionality is available for any computer check or checks keyed on the fly. It will not be available for any manual check or check that is not posted. Lesson 3 for Payables Management. In this lesson, we will look at the new functionality that will allow you to edit Payables transaction information. The first is the ability to change the remit to address ID used on a transaction up until it has been paid out. Second is the ability to edit 1099 information at the transaction level. Third is a utility that will allow you to mass update the tax type on the vendor as a whole. Let's go ahead and look at this new functionality in Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013. Under Transactions, open the Edit Transaction Information window. In the Edit Payables Transaction window, the Remit to ID field has been added. You are now able to change the Remit to Address ID on the transaction up until the transaction has been paid out. Under Transactions, a new window has been added to edit 1099 transaction information. In the Edit 1099 Transaction Information window, enter the vendor ID and all of their invoices will be displayed. Here you have the ability to edit the transactions one at a time. You can change the tax type on it, the box number, or the amount. If you enter less than the amount that you want to show up on the 1099, it will allow you. If you try and enter more than the amount, you will get a message that the 1099 amount cannot exceed the document total, and it will put the 1099 amount back to the document total amount. So go ahead and change per invoice the 1099 amount and click Process to update the 1099. The 1099 Transaction Information Audit Report will be available to print to screen, printer, or file. This audit report will show the old tax type and new tax type, the old box number and new box number, and the old amount and new amount, so you can keep track of the changes that you have made. The third enhancement was under the Update 1099 Information utility. In the Update 1099 Information window, you've always had the ability to transfer between different tax types. However, now if you click on Vendor and 1099 Transactions, you have an additional option in the list for not a 1099 vendor. So if you forgot to mark a 1099 vendor and find them at the end of the year, you can change to go from not being a 1099 vendor to being the type that you choose, restrict on the vendor ID, and click Process, and it will mark all of their transactions as 1099able. Then you can go to the Edit 1099 Information window and back down by transaction level if any of the individual transactions should not have been 1099'd. You can also do the opposite, where if you marked a vendor as 1099able, so let's say I want to change someone who had a miscellaneous tax type and I don't want them to be 1099able, I can go ahead and go from being miscellaneous to being not a 1099 vendor, click Process, and again I'll get an audit report. And the audit report will show all the transactions that it made, showing going from an old tax type of miscellaneous to a new tax type of not being 1099. And notice the new 1099 amount is 0. So this new functionality will be really handy if you need to edit the 1099 information at the transaction level or at the vendor level. Lesson 4 for Payables Management. In this lesson, we will look at the addition of the 1096 summary form, as well as enhancements made to the 1099 form. These include a separate address ID on the vendor maintenance window to be used on the 1099 forms, as well as additional 1099 boxes available, and the ability to print the 1096 summary form. Let's go to Microsoft Dynamics GP and look at these new enhancements. To open the vendor maintenance card, click on Vendor under the Cards menu. In the vendor maintenance window, notice a new address ID in the lower left-hand corner for 1099. You are now able to store and use a separate address ID to mail the 1099s to. Click on the Options button. In the vendor maintenance options window, new 1099 boxes have been added. In this example, I have miscellaneous selected for the tax type. The new box that has been added is box 18 for state income. If you select dividend, the new boxes added are 10 for exempt interest dividends, 11 for specified private activity bond interest dividends, and 14 for state tax withheld. For the interest tax type, box 13 for state tax withheld has been added. These new boxes are also available in the 1099 details window. The next enhancement is in the Print 1099 window under Routines. In the Print 1099 window, notice the addition of the 1096 summary form in the lower left-hand corner to be printed. Simply mark the 1096 form after you have printed your 1099 forms and click the Print button at the top. You can print the 1099 summary form to screen printer or file. I have printed the 1096 summary form to the screen so that you can see it. However, you would want to print it to your printer to a pre-printed form. I hope that these new enhancements will be useful to you so that you can submit a 1096 form and have more accurate reporting with your 1099s. Let's review the new features for payables management. The void enhancements include having all the credit documents unapplied when you void a payment, having the invoice on the credit card vendor voided at the same time that you void a credit card payment, and also having reconciled check indicators so that you know if you're trying to void a check that has already been reconciled in the bank reconciliation module. The second new feature is the ability to reprint the check or apply information in a report form. Third is the ability to edit payables transaction information. This includes being able to edit the remit to address on the invoice up until the invoice is paid out, and also having the ability to edit the 1099 information either at the transaction level or the vendor level. And last, the addition of the 1099 summary form will be helpful, as well as new boxes on the 1099 form and an additional address ID on the vendor maintenance card to mail the 1099 forms to. I hope that all of these new features will be helpful to you. Thank you for your time and attention today to review the new features for payables management.